So this is my first reading journal for our theater history class, and I am doing it on Macbeth. I was part of the group that filmed the Macbeth scene, so I figured it would just be easiest for me to do it for this because I read the play, I love the play, made a lot of connections before class, and then we had class and we talked about some things in regards to Macbeth that I was like, ooh, that's a good point that I should definitely discuss in my reading journal. So here we are. So I have like a list that I'm reading off of. I have three major points that I want to talk about. The first one is Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's dynamic. The dynamic between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth is very, very interesting to me because it's not like the typical dynamic that you find portrayed in plays, but also just general stories from this time period. The way that their dynamic kind of works is that Macbeth is almost like a submissive husband, which is kind of like a strange thing. It to this day is still not a thing that is very commonly like portrayed, I guess, in movies and TV shows and books, etc., etc. It's just typically the husband is the more dominant one in the relationship. That's just how it is. We all saw 50 Shades of Grey. It's not like that. I think Macbeth is definitely a submissive husband, and Lady Macbeth definitely takes the, like, power dynamic wise, she definitely has the upper hand. For example, let's take a look at scene 1 from scene 7, act 1, scene 7, of Macbeth, where she's essentially being like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? She's like kind of like making fun of him almost in that scene. And it's very, very interesting because that is not something women would be saying to their husbands' faces in that time period, because it was very much a time where women could not talk back to their husbands because that was just not that was not like a socially acceptable thing to do. So I'm rereading Macbeth, and as I'm kind of taking a look at their relationship, I'm like thinking to myself, like, this sounds so vaguely familiar. Where have I seen this dynamic before? And then it hits me. Roman and Jerry from Succession. I'm a big Succession nerd. I have my Roman Roy Funko Pop sitting on my desk over here. It is one of my favorite series I've ever watched. It is possibly one of my favorite pieces of television ever. Roman and Jerry are very, very obviously like Lady Macbeth and Macbeth for like a very wide number of reasons. But to go back to my first point that I was making, they definitely fund the dynamic of submissive husband, dominant wife. Despite the fact that technically Roman and Jerry are not married, even though there are jokes about it in the series.
Oh, and one more thing real quick. Should we get married?
What?
You know, not that, like an equivalent of a thing, like I abduct you and force you to live with me.
That's not equivalent.
Well, then you kill me, you chop my dick off, something. I'm kidding, but you know what I'm saying. You eat me, I eat you, like they do in Germany. Anyway, a lot to think about. I get it, so let it. Bye.
But we see them, that isn't the only aspect of these two characters that parallels Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, because we also see in the series Jerry kind of acts as a kind of not a voice of reason, but like a devil on Roman's shoulder, which we see Lady Macbeth do to Macbeth in the play. We see her be like, we need to make sure this prophecy comes true. You need to go out and kill these guys so that the prophecy comes true. And while that doesn't happen in Succession, what does happen in Succession is Jerry and Roman kind of form an alliance where Jerry helps Roman make decisions that she knows not we'll favor Roman, and then in the long term we'll favor her, which is what Lady Macbeth does in Macbeth. There's also this one official poster for one of the seasons of Succession that reminds me so much of this one poster for this specific production of Macbeth. Thing number two, discussion point number two, is in class we briefly touched on the final girl trope and how Lady Macbeth almost fits that trope. Technically, Lady Macbeth does not fit the final girl trope because she does, you know, kill herself, which technically makes her exempt from being a final girl, but that's irrelevant. We're gonna call her a final girl for the sake of discussion. The whole discussion of the final girl trope got me thinking, because the final girl trope is a very, very interesting concept in terms of gender studies. I think it's so interesting how this almost pro-feminist or pro-feminism concept almost kind of wraps back around to being kind of misogynistic in a way, or kind of sexist. And there are multiple cases of this happening in some of my favorite horror movies. I am a big horror nerd, in case you couldn't tell by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre poster behind my head. I have an extensive horror movie DVD collection right over here. Back to my point. The way that Lady Macbeth is presented in the play is, we talk about this a lot when it comes to Shakespeare, but the way that he was writing his like empowering women characters, it's very, very like woke for the time that it came out in. Like, people view Lady Macbeth as one of Shakespeare's most like feminist characters, as being one of the strongest women he has written, which is valid because it's true. It is arguably true. She is one of the most empowered women that Shakespeare has written about. But as we look back on this play nowadays, it's like, are we sure about this? You know? Like, she is definitely like a very, very interesting character to look at. But it's, again, it's one of those things where it's like it's feminist in a way that it wraps back around to being anti-feminist. I don't think it's very feminist to have the whole like, unsex me so I can have the confidence of a man, which I will touch back on in point 3. But for now, we're gonna focus on point 2, which was my final girl point. But yeah, Lady Macbeth technically doesn't follow the final girl trope. Obviously, she dies. But it is the way that she is a feminist character that wraps back around to being kind of sexist, is very, very reminiscent of the modern horror genre, because there are so many examples of like modern horror movies that have final girls that are ridiculously misogynistic. One of my favorite horror movies is a perfect example of this. I have a ticket for it on this wall because I got to see a screening of it when it was its 15th anniversary back in November. Jennifer's Body is a roller coaster of a movie. It's definitely a product of its time, I will say that. The movie came out in the early 2000s. It's one of those situations where it's like, it's misogynistic, but we have to kind of excuse it. This was so normalized in the time period it came out in. Misogyny is not the only issue that movie has when it comes to being incredibly dated with its bigotry. That is going to be the blanket cover I'm going to use to describe that movie. It's a product of its time. But again, Jennifer's Body utilizes the final girl trope, introduces Needy as its main character, and Jennifer, her best friend, as its antagonist. Needy lives in the end, but without spoiling the movie, it does wrap back around to being a little bit misogynistic because there's some demon possession stuff that goes on, and Needy technically only becomes the final girl by becoming possessed by a sex demon. Another perfect example of this is a horror movie I watched not that long ago, actually, for the first time. It Follows. The concept of this film is that there is this ghost that only certain people can see. And when you see this ghost, like, this ghost actively sets out to try and kill you. The only way to get, the ghost only starts to try to kill you if you have sex with someone who is already seeing the ghost, and you can only stop seeing the ghost by having sex with someone else. So the perfect way to describe it is it's this, like, evil STD. And it does feel kind of slut-shamey, the way that movie is written. It's very, very strange. It's a very interesting concept for a film, especially a horror film. There are other movies that did this kind of thing better, though. Smile is a perfect example of a film that did the same kind of concept, but much better, without being misogynistic, because It Follows is kind of slut-shamey. It doesn't none of the characters are outwardly like, hey, you're a slut, you shouldn't have had sex with that guy because now you're gonna die. But that is the subtext of the film. The subtext of the film is very, very blatant. It is that you shouldn't have sex because you will die. It's like that scene from Mean Girls. It's literally that line from Mean Girls where the coach is like, don't have sex because you will get pregnant and die.
Don't have sex because you will get pregnant and die.
Which is just an inherently not true statement. A final example of misogynistic horror would be the Terrifier franchise. The Terrifier franchise is controversial for a number of reasons, but one of the main controversies this franchise has is the misogyny of it all, which is... I don't even want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because people online get into such heated debates about these films that it almost has warned me away from watching them. The first one is the only one I have seen, so that is the one I will be basing this off of. But it does kind of set a bit of a weird tone when you have this male villain who is killing people in these incredibly brutally fashions, but he's mainly only killing women, and he only kind of really targets women, and the girl escapes at the end. But then it's kind of like revealed that she doesn't. So she's technically not even a final girl either. Very much like Lady Macbeth. Point number 3. Lady Macbeth's "unsex me" line. I believe there's multiple lines in the play where Lady Macbeth makes comments about wanting to be removed from her womanhood so that she can have the traits of a man to better herself. Which is definitely a bizarre thing for thinking of her as a feminist character, but is also a very interesting thing to read coming from a trans-masculine person. Because these are all things that I have also thought, can I be removed of my womanhood for better or for worse, It's an experience that a lot of people who I am friends with and who I myself have experience with. These are concepts that I'm not born to. And these are concepts that are brought up in a lot of really good movies. The concept of strip me of my womanhood so I can have the confidence of a man. It's a very interesting concept. I think it's a very interesting concept. Is it a little bit sexist? Maybe. But We're not viewing this through the sexism lens. We're viewing this through the transgender lens. Sit with me. Walk with me. Listen. My first point I would like to make for this argument is the film Titane tells the story of this girl who experiences something incredibly Lynchian. She kind of, spoiler warning, has sex with her car and also kills someone in the same night. She steals the identity of her murder victim. It's such a beautiful film, first of all, but the concept of it is so genuinely intriguing. Again, from a trans perspective. It's very interesting because we see her experience this kind of transition where she is becoming more confident in the masculinity of it all, but all the while she's growing pregnant with the car's baby. Which is as weird as it sounds. There is a scene in the film where she gives birth, and instead of blood everywhere, it's car oil. It's a good movie, I promise. But yeah, I just think it's such a genuinely intriguing concept, and it is definitely a concept that kind of parallels Lady Macbeth, being like, hey, I want to be removed of my womanhood so I can have the confidence of my husband, because I, as a woman, can't experience that kind of confidence. The main character of the film has a very similar feeling where she's like, I don't know how to cope with the fact that I have killed someone. I should just steal his identity and fuck my car. Which Lady Macbeth does not do, for the record, but you get my point. Another perfect example of this is one of my favorite movies, Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Yes, I have the Criterion Collection edition of Hedwig and the Angry Inch. I love this film so much. Hedwig and the Angry Inch tells the story of its titular character, Hedwig, having to undergo a sex change in order to emigrate from Berlin to America, because they aren't letting men out of the country. So Hedwig needs to become a woman in order to legally be able to leave. So Hedwig undergoes a sex change, only there's a bit of a complication when it comes to the bottom surgery aspect, hence the Angry Inch. I think that is such an interesting concept, the concept of changing your gender identity to save yourself, because that is essentially what Lady Macbeth is asking for. She's asking to be unsexed so she can have the confidence of a man, so that she doesn't have to deal with the agony of womanhood anymore. It's a very, very interesting concept, and it is a concept that Hedwig and the Angry Inch is almost entirely about. Macbeth aside, this is genuinely such a beautiful film, and it is one of my favorites, hence why I have the Criterion Collection edition. It's such an interesting concept, the idea that transitioning unintentionally can save your life. There's another film that deals with this topic, but in an almost reversible way. I'm referring obviously to I Saw the TV Glow. Except I Saw the TV Glow deals with this concept in the opposite way, where the character avoids transition and is then faced with the horror of living your life as the wrong person, which is also kind of borderline the way that Lady Macbeth could be viewed through this transmasculine lens. She asks to be unsexed, but obviously, considering the times, that isn't exactly a thing that she can just do. She can't go out and get a sex change because it was a really long time ago, and these just weren't things that were, these weren't even things that people knew we could do scientifically and medically. And two, I don't think the word transgender or the word, any of the terminology that we use nowadays even existed at this period of time. these were not the linear concepts that we have nowadays. Could Lady Macbeth have been a transmasculine person? She straight up could have been. Shakespeare fully could have been trying to write a transmasculine character while writing Lady Macbeth, but because they didn't have the right terminology for it, she comes out the way that she does, talking about wanting to be unsexed. Which, if we're talking about being unsexed through the lens of being entirely removed from gender and not just removed from your femininity in place of masculinity, she could even be perceived as being non-binary, which is also a very, very interesting lens to look at her through. All that to be said, Lady Macbeth might be transgender. To conclude, I really enjoyed reading Macbeth. This was the second time that I read it. I read it for the first time back in high school. I love it. It's such a good play. And I think a lot of the themes in this play are mirrored in modern media. I didn't even touch on the whole downfall of Macbeth's psychological capabilities. I fully could have, but I didn't. This would be 2 times the length that it is if I had. Yeah. That's all I gotta say. Thank you for listening to me rant about my favorite Shakespeare play and my favorite horror movies and how they intertwine with each other. And also Succession.